Samuel again today. But one day at work, many years ago, we had some guys working for us, some younger guys, and they were trying to get either a water pump started or a generator, I can't remember, but it was a full start engine. And they were, just pulling and pulling and pulling and probably gonna throw their arms out pretty soon. And they're like, Josh, we can't get it started. And so I run through the regular questions. All right, you checked the gas? Yeah, we checked the gas. Did you got the choke on? Yeah, we got the choke on. Is the gas turned on? Gas is turned on. What about, did you check the oil? Because the oil safety. And, oh no, we didn't check the oil. So they checked the oil. It was fine. And I'm like, well, I don't know, just, as a man, let me try pulling it, right? Everybody, let me do it. And I bent down to grab the handle. The on-off switch was still switched off. It's the easiest answer, but it was right there in front of their faces. They couldn't see it. They just couldn't see it. Whatever it was, they were blind to it in that moment. But that's what it takes sometimes. It's just a fresh set of eyes to be able to see what the problem actually is. I know whenever I was younger, going to church conferences, church leader conferences, and they would always say, fresh eyes are so valuable for your church. And Andy Stanley, he said at his house, they thought, they were building his house, they thought they would need this outlet high up on the wall because they had planned on putting a TV there. And later on they decided, that's kind of a weird spot for a TV, but the electrician had already been there. So this outlet was just in a high spot, random wall as you walked in. It just looked so funny. So they decided, we'll put this picture of a bird over it. And they said, every time we had somebody over, they would say, oh, what an interesting picture of a bird in this random spot on your wall. The fresh eyes were pointing out what didn't seem right. And so there are things in the church that we do that to an outsider might seem really confusing. Communion. We eat a wafer and we drink some juice because Jesus died on the cross, obviously. And that's why we have a communion meditation to go along with it, to hopefully, not only bring us into a moment where we are appreciating what Jesus did for us, but also kind of explain to a new person what's going on. But fresh eyes are so valuable because we might be doing something that is like, why would you guys do it like that? And so fresh eyes are valuable. Hannah had fresh eyes. Whenever she finally turned to the Lord, all of her pain, all of her, everything she was dealing with inside because of her barrenness, she turned it over to God. And barrenness in that time was symbolic of being worthless. Your job as a woman in that time was one thing: provide an heir. And she could not do that. And so in her culture, she was seen as worthless. But then she turned it over to God. And she said, God, I can't do this on my own. My husband can't help me. Only you can be my salvation. Only you can provide me with a future, with a hope. And so Hannah had fresh eyes on her situation. She was seeing it for really what it was, under God's control. And so we're going to read Hannah's prayer. We're going to read some sections of Hannah's prayer. I'm going to go through all of chapter 2 today, but only bits and pieces, so I really think it'd be valuable if you read chapter 2 maybe this afternoon or sometime this week to get the full picture. But this is what Hannah said in 1 Samuel chapter 2. Let me get there. She said, "My heart exults in the Lord." Now, exalts with a U and exalts with an A are two different words. Exult is like rejoicing. It is to have inner joy. So she says, I have inner joy because of what the Lord has done. My horn is exalted in the Lord. Now that's a fun one too, right? Like, Hannah has a horn. But that is symbolic. So there's a lot of symbolism going on in the first part of Samuel. My horn is like, imagine an animal, right? You've got either a ram or a bull, and their horn is their strength. It is their defense. It is what they have to ward off others, to show their strength. And so Hannah's saying, my strength has been lifted up. My head has been lifted up because of what the Lord has done. My mouth derides my enemies. And the Hebrew for that is, it is also a animal-like symbolism, where it's like, my mouth is wide to devour my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. She doesn't attack people with her mouth. She can defend God because she has seen his salvation. Her faith has been made real in obedience, and her obedience has been rewarded by God. So let's go to verse 2. There is none holy. This is how she rejoices in her salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. Verse 6 says, the Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. And we like to think we get rich by our own efforts. We hustle, we grind, we watch the correct YouTube video on how to market perfectly, or whatever it might be. There are spenders and there are savers, right? And a spender will say, I need to spend money to make money. And the saver says, you won't have any money if you spend it. So we think in our own minds, I can make myself rich. I can make myself successful. But here Hannah says that only God makes rich, and only God makes poor. Life is a lesson. And we think we are controlling what's going on, but we have no control. God is doing all these things in the world to produce in us holiness, so that way we can shine a light like Hannah is shining, to point out we should be faithful to God because he is faithful to us. Even whenever I'm rich, God has provided. Even when I'm poor, God has provided. Now go down to verse 9. He will guard the feet of his people, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge to the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then verse 11. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. So Hannah had said, God, if you give me a son, I will lend him to you. For all the days of his life, he is lent to you. How many people have ever prayed, God, if you give me this, I will do this for you? Right? Nobody's raising their hands, but there we go. We got one honest guy in the house. But then, what if you got what you prayed for? Wouldn't you kind of, yeah, I know I needed some extra money, but God didn't give it to me. That was just my employer paying me. I don't really have to do what I said I was going to do, because God didn't just pop out of heaven and make this money miraculously appear in my hands. So I don't have to follow through on what I said. But Hannah actually did. Hannah said, let me wean my boy, and then I will hand him over to the temple. At 3 years old, Samuel was given to the temple. And you probably are like, hey, I'll give you my 3-year-old, right? My mom always said, it ain't the terrible 2s, it's the terrible 3s. But a mother who had been year after year after year crying out to God, saying, I just want a son. And then she actually left him. One commentator said, Hannah is a true daughter of Abraham, because Abraham had to wait for a son 25 years. And then God said, I want you to take Isaac, take him to the mountain, and you're going to sacrifice him. And Abraham went with Isaac up the mountain. And in his mind, he's thinking, all right, God's given me this son, and I'm going to have to kill him. And, God can raise him up again. I will be faithful to what God says. Then God sends an angel and says, oh, don't sacrifice him. This was a test. But Hannah actually left her 3-year-old at the temple to be faithful to what God said. And I'm sure this prayer was her way of worshiping, but also reassuring herself. God is faithful. God is strong. God is in control. My salvation is through him alone. And so I will trust that he will guard his faithful. As I leave my son at the temple, I trust that God is still in control. If you want to take notes, your first blank is this. When we see correctly, we stay committed. Commitment in America, that's hard to come by. If you say you're going to do something, you find an excuse not to do it, right? You say, oh yeah, we'll be there, but you don't actually mean it. You say, I'll let you know. But then you never let me know. Not me. You guys are all faithful to me. I really appreciate that. But in America, that's what, it's hard to find commitment. It's hard to find people that say yes and say no and mean it. But when we see reality, whenever we see truly that God is in control, we can stay committed to what we say, because we know he will guard us. But they say ignorance is bliss, right? If you don't see, if you see just in a naive way, that's where it's at. That's the best way to be. We all think about, man, whenever I was a kid, it was so easy. Ignorance is bliss. But who is it hard? A child has it easy, but they make it hard for their parents, don't they? Johnny, you got 6. 6 ignorantly bliss. Not right now. You got some older ones now. But we think ignorance is bliss. But that's only blissful for the ignorant. The ignorant make it very difficult for those whom they are dependent upon. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is selfishness. Ignorance is childish. We have to see clearly the reality of this world. And we have to judge correctly. We have to leave it in God's hands. Jesus said this to his disciples. I've got it on the slide. Matthew 10:16. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Because we cannot be ignorant. We cannot be dependent upon anything except for God. And I know that Mariah tells me that she needs me, and I tell Mariah that I need her too. But in reality, the only thing we really need is God. And Mariah fears all the time, oh, Josh, if anything happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. And I know exactly what she'd do. She'd do the same thing she did for 25 years before we met each other. She would thrive because she depends upon God. She chooses to love me. That's really what it is. We cannot be dependent upon anything but God. That is why we are called children of God. But Jesus says, be wise. See clearly. Open your eyes, because you will be in the midst of wolves. You will be in the midst of people who will take advantage of you. You will be in the midst of people who will persecute you. You will be in the midst of people who are going to do all sorts of things just to attack the purpose of Christ. And Paul said, our fight isn't actually against the powers of this world. Our fight is against the spiritual powers that be. Satan is described as the prince of this world. And so we are pawns. And we get mad at each other. But really what is going on is a spiritual battle. And Hannah could see that. Hannah could see that God will judge the world. It was not her job. Her job was to be wise, to see the world with open eyes. But Jesus said, don't just be wise, be innocent. Be holy. Be guiltless. Be pure. Don't act in a way it seems wise, but it's actually a sin. You can be wise and you cannot be innocent. You can be innocent, but you can not be wise. But Jesus tells us to be bold. Have your eyes open, but stay away from sin. Otherwise, when we allow sin to continue, we blind ourselves. That's point number 2, if you want to take notes. When we allow sin to continue, we choose blindness. Our hearts are hard. Our minds are preoccupied. And all we are thinking about is the temporary. I think it might have been, I'm getting old. Man, who is? John MacArthur. Okay, John MacArthur, American pastor. John MacArthur said, sin does not provide happiness. Sin provides a moment of pleasure. And that is what sin is. It is a temporary fix. It is a temporary moment of something that we think is going to feel good. Whether it is complaining or gossip or spending too much or sex outside of marriage, whatever it is, it's a temporary moment of pleasure. And whenever we give into these temporary moments, they occupy our mind. They occupy our heart. They are the pursuits that we take. And it avoids what God is wanting us to pursue. We are choosing to blind ourselves. And I don't know what it is for you, but in this moment, there's probably something popping up in your mind. That is probably what you need to stop. That is probably where you are choosing blindness right now. As I said, 1 Samuel does a lot of symbolism, does a lot of comparison. And so we saw Hannah with her eyes open. But there's another player in 1 Samuel 2, Eli, the priest. The priest that is now kind of taking care of Hannah's son. And if you want to look at your Bibles, chapter 2, verse 12 and verse 17. This is who Hannah leaves her son with. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. And then the next 5 verses describe what they're doing, and they are taking way too much of the meat that is being sacrificed. In that time, they would give an animal sacrifice, they would cut the fat off, they would boil the meat, they would allow the fat to be burned, and then the priests would be able to take a prong and remove some of the meat. And that's what the priests lived on, that hunk of meat. But what was going on with these sons, Phinehas and Hophni, they would either demand the meat before it was boiled, or they would take way too much of the meat, all sorts of things. And then they would say, if you don't give it to us, we will take it by force. Imagine someone standing there at the tithe box, and they say, okay, so 10% to the church, 3% is actually coming to me, like the person, not me. So you can make that check out to Aaron. Use Aaron today. And if you don't, then Aaron's going to beat you up. And he's going to take your wallet. Wow.
Can't believe it.
Just calm down a little bit, all right? Could you imagine going to God's temple where someone threatens you with force because they're going to take their chunk before it's meant to be? And not only that, later on it describes that they're also sleeping with the women attendants at the gates. And Eli is their father. He is the chief priest of the temple. And these guys are priests. And what does it say? They did not know the Lord. This is my fear. That there will be people in our church that are serving, that think they're doing what God is wanting them to do. And God will say, they actually don't know me. And it is not only just a fear for you, it's a fear for me. Because we'll see, go on to the next one. This is the word to Eli. I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings? He isn't the one who is taking the meat. His sons are. But Eli is being held responsible for what he is allowing to take place. He says that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people, Israel. So as parents, as leaders at work, as people with friends that may not be doing what they're supposed to be doing, we are responsible for what we allow others to do, for what we allow to take place whenever it is our responsibility to speak up. Eli, as you'll find this out as you read this afternoon or this week, 1 Samuel 2. Eli was hearing all sorts of reports about what his sons were doing. And it was paragraphs and paragraphs. And then another section. And then finally Eli got around to having a little chat with his sons. But he didn't fire them. He just said, what are you guys doing? Come on, shape up. It was too little too late. It is much easier to correct someone as they get off the path than try to correct someone who's doing their own path. And so it takes consistency. It takes boundaries. It takes being people that say things before it's too late. Because when we allow sin to continue, we choose blindness. We choose to be blind to the real consequences that come with sin. That's what happens when we get caught up in the temporary. Now, whenever I was young, as a strapping old man of 30, TV had commercials. Let me tell you what. Do you remember commercials? Probably, if you have Charter still, or Dish. But if you have anything else, you probably pay the extra $3 to not have commercials. Commercials were moments whenever you could decide, I think I'm going to turn it off now. Or a commercial would come on and you say, okay, I'm going to go empty the dishwasher and then I'll come back. You know, they were moments to take a break. And now it's like, you've been sitting there for 6 hours and you didn't even know that the sun set. You've suddenly watched the entire first season and you're thinking, oh man, that was such a good cliffhanger. Should I start the second season? And our time just goes by and we don't even realize it. Commercials were wonderful things that gave you an opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to turn this off, or I'm going to go do something productive. I remember telling myself all the time, on the next commercial, I'll get up. Me and Mariah still joke around. We don't have commercials anymore. But I'll still say, all right, Mariah, on the next commercial, I'll turn it off. Never came. We need commercial breaks for our lives. We need to step away for a moment. We need enough time outside of what is actually right in front of our face to remember to see correctly. Even Jesus needed a quiet time. He would often withdraw to quiet and lonely places, is how the Bible phrases it. How often do you choose quiet and lonely? How often do you choose to reframe your thinking? How often do you choose in a moment of anger to pray instead of saying something else? If Jesus, the Son of God and fully human, needed to withdraw, why do you think you don't have to? Why do you think you're strong enough? Now, we like to say, oh, well, I'm a Hannah. We like to say, the person sitting next to me is definitely an Eli. But the truth of the matter is, we are all Elis. We are all blind in some areas. And why I chose blindness was because in chapter 3, we'll find out that his eyesight is literally physically failing. So his physical condition matched his spiritual condition. We are blind to areas. But my hope is that there are areas in your life where you do see clearly, where you are a mixture of Eli and Hannah. And our pursuit is to be more like Hannah. But that only takes time with the Lord. The only way that happens is time with the Lord. We think, oh, well, when I get more time, then I will be more faithful. You're never going to have more time. There are 24 hours in a day. You don't need more time to be more faithful. You need to be faithful with what you have. Jesus said, to those who are faithful in a little, much will be given. You don't need more money to be more faithful. We need to be faithful with what we have. Because blindness isn't the end. As we choose sin, we choose blindness, and with blindness comes consequences. That's our last note today. When we choose blindness, we suffer the consequences. We don't know all that Eli had to deal with. We know people were complaining to him. We know that his sons probably stressed him out. We know that there was a man of God who came to Eli and said, our next slide. This is what he said. The Lord declares, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor. And those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. As in, he will not see them very highly. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength. People, Israel. Typo, that's not Hebrew. It should just end with strength. I will cut off your strength. And what, if you continue reading, the Lord is saying, I'm going to end your household. Eli's sons will be killed by the sword in the same day, and Eli will weep, and he will be the last person in his household. And that was Eli's punishment for the blindness that he chose. We don't know how our lives will be in 10 years. But if we choose blindness, we can assume that at some point it will catch up to us. God says he will honor those who honor him. He will lightly esteem those who despise him. The state of Israel at this time was like Eli. The end of Judges is the beginning of 1 Samuel, and this is the very last verse of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. There was no overarching authority. No one respected anything. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that is a lot like the way we live our lives, where we only do what is right in our own eyes. The sad thing is, a lot of us are choosing blindness. And whenever we get to Saul, we'll see that Samuel says this to Saul. 1 Samuel 15:23 says, "For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry." Basically, another translation says, rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft. Stubbornness is as bad as worshiping idols. Hannah's prayer said, "Let no one be arrogant, because God is the weight of our measure." Our words carry meaning. Our actions carry consequences. We are not called to do what is right in our eyes. We are called to be faithful to what God calls us to. And what is God calling you to? Well, look at your bank account. God is saying be faithful in that. God is saying look at your household. It's been given to you. Be faithful in that. Look at your relationships. God is saying you've been given them. Be faithful in them. Whatever you have, God makes rich and makes poor. He has given it to you, and He has called you to be faithful in that. The good thing is, God is always faithful. Now this is the other side of the coin. We should do what we can do. But God gives us the strength to do it. God is always faithful. He will honor those who honor Him. He will give strength to those who are pursuing what He says to pursue. You cannot do it on your own. Just like Ross said, the law is impossible to keep on our own. You can't even go the speed limit on your own. I know I can. I probably shouldn't have admitted that. I plead the fifth. We break human laws. How are we going to keep God's law? But the truth is, whenever we hand it over to God, when we say, God, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know how to do it, and I don't know where the strength is going to come from to do it, He says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You don't have to worry about what you can't control because I'm in control of it. You don't have to worry about being strong on your own because I will be strong for you. In that moment, just be faithful to what God has given you. And like last week, we mentioned the mustard seed. What is small right now in your faith will grow so much bigger as you feed it, as you water it, as you take time to care for it. And so turn your minds to the things above. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and He will make your path straight. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And if you don't know Christ, if you are trying to do it on your own today, now is the time to surrender. And now is the time to turn it over to Christ. Let's go ahead and stand as we prepare. Let's pray. Father God, I pray that you open our eyes, that you disrupt our routines, that you give us distractions from what is going on in front of our face, so that way we can remember to turn to you. because naturally we want to be Eli's. We desire blindness to make it easier on ourselves. But God, help us to see that seeing life for what it truly is better. Because you are our hope and our salvation. You control all things, God. And we commit our paths to your hands. God, I pray that you will guard our feet as we pursue righteousness, as we pursue faithfulness. Help us to turn away from evilness, from wickedness, from rebellion, and from stubbornness. Help us stay committed in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits to your truth. So that way we do not waver. And God, I thank you for sending Christ to open our eyes, to open our hearts, open our minds, to see reality. And God, for those who do not know Christ yet, I pray that they see the reality that the only way they're headed is towards hell. That you are the only path to true salvation. This life, God, is temporary, but you are eternal. Our spirits will live eternally with you. And it is my prayer that everyone here comes to know you, to see you, and to be told, well done, my good and faithful servant. I thank you for Christ, that he won a victory for us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.